If you were worried about the Falcons being on the fence about their quarterback situation, worry no more, because today we learned that Desmond Ridder is QB1.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, guys, you know me. I'm Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black, and, of course, the most humble host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta podcast family, your team every day. And we thank you guys for making Locked On Falcons your first listen as we go through this free agent frenzy. Of course, Locked On Falcons you can find on a variety of podcast platforms, including on YouTube. Subscribe to us on YouTube, and you'll get the video version of the podcast the night before the audio drops. And you can also check us out on your Roku or Amazon Fire TV by downloading the Locked On Sports Atlanta app on your Roku and Amazon Fire TV. So we are in day 2 of the legal tampering period, and we got some more moves made from the Falcons. One from late Monday night, where the Falcons signed linebacker Kaden Ellis, formerly of the New Orleans Saints, and then again Tuesday morning when they signed Taylor Heinicke, formerly of the Washington Commanders. Later in today's episode, we will talk about Kaden Ellis. Later, we will be joined by David Harrison of Locked On Commanders to talk about Taylor Heinicke. And with the Heinicke move, it led to not only national media people, but also local media people sort of confirming what we have suspected all along, that Desmond Ridder, that move was made with the idea of Taylor Heinicke pushing Desmond Ridder, who is the presumptive starter for the Atlanta Falcons in 2023. And I think, as I said, we've been on this track for a while. But as throughout this process, I've maintained here on the podcast, you can't put anything past this organization because of the whole Deshaun Watson thing, where we talk about zigging when you think they're going to zag. That was a major zig, right? When we thought they're going to zag. And this organization, I think we just have to sort of make peace with the idea that this organization, this regime at least, is never going to publicly commit to a player like we used to see under the former regime, where they were like, this guy's a Falcon for life and all that sort of stuff. You know, they will say that afterwards. Basically, after they commit the long-term extension, like we saw with Chris Lindstrom, then that will be their public declaration that this is their guy. But they'll always be like, we love the player, but we'll see. That's kind of how they're going to roll. And, you know, it gets into a conversation about what the plan is and what the plan has been. And I've maintained on this podcast for well over a year now that, you know, the Falcons, like pretty much every NFL organization, tend to make it up as they go, right? NFL teams, because the NFL stands for not for long, can only really make plans like 6 months at a time. This time of year, they're making plans. Okay, we're going to construct our roster so that we can go out there and compete, you know, for the next 6 months. And then we get to August, September, they make adjustments, they cut players, they trade players, whatever, they sign players, and then they make whatever adjustments they need to do in order for the next 6 months to hopefully win games and be playing meaningful football in January and February. And then that 6-month plan expires, and then they do it all over again. And so that is kind of the way that it works in the NFL in terms of this notion that you have these long multi-year plans. That kind of is BS at this point, is what I'm trying to put forth. And when we look at these plans, these long multi-year plans, we only attribute it after the fact when they work out, right? You know, you look at the Falcons. Like I know in years past, I've been like, oh, Dimitroff had this great plan when he came in. They signed Michael Turner. They drafted Matt Ryan. Then they went out and got him weapons like Tony Gonzalez. And it was like, oh, that was all part of this grand 3-year plan. It was like, no, it wasn't, right? They just basically, you know, it wasn't like Dimitroff sold Arthur Blank on, I think, the original Zoom interview, if I'm not mistaken, you know, in that interview, that this is what my plan is for the next 3 years. It was just like, okay, well, Michael Turner, we need to improve the running game. Michael Turner is the best option in free agency. The Dolphins passed on Matt Ryan with the #1 overall pick, so we'll take advantage of that. And then, you know, the Chiefs are basically going to sell, you know, Tony Gonzalez for a second-round pick, a future Hall of Famer for a second-round pick. We'll take advantage. We'll take advantage about that in the future. And that's just kind of how it works. You just kind of make it up as you go. And so, that being said, I do feel like the move towards Desmond Ridder has been months in the making. And it goes back to a conversation we had on this podcast back in early December, late November, when there was a lot of people speculating that the fact that the Falcons had not made the change from Marcus Mariota to Desmond Ridder at that point in time meant that the Falcons were not in love with Desmond Ridder, did not have faith in him moving forward. And I thought that was, basically people using what I think is probably conventional wisdom, that if you love a player, you're going to play him as soon as possible, all that stuff and more. But I don't think that really applies to this specific regime in this organization, because if you look at this regime and what they did in year one, and we talked about this back then, you just kind of looked at, the two diverging paths of Richie Grant and Jalen Mayfield, right? Two day two picks from the previous year where, we spent all of 2021, or but y'all, not me, y'all spent all of 2021 complaining about, why isn't Richie Grant on the field? Does this mean he's going to be a bust? Does it mean he's not ready? All this various stuff. There's a lot of energy spent on why Richie Grant was not seeing the field. And then the Falcons had this plan, right? It was like, we're going to play him when he's ready. And you saw in year two for Richie Grant, he made a big jump. And I haven't heard a single person utter the terms Richie Grant possible bust in over 6 months now. And then you contrast that with Jalen Mayfield, who the Falcons didn't really have a robust plan, just kind of threw him to the wolves. And, we'll see what happens with Jalen Mayfield, but it's certainly a possibility that he may be out of the league in a year or two, or whatever the case may be. So, I think with a young quarterback like Desmond Ridder that they did actually believe in, they didn't want to make that same mistake, especially at such a critical position of throwing a guy to the wolves. That was the whole thing that we spent, months talking about, Aaron Donald back here behind me, that, there are some wolves out there that are going to tear this guy apart if you throw him in there too early. And I think with Desmond Ridder, you have a guy that has the potential to develop into the future. And again, we can sit here and split hairs about when the opportune time to play Ridder was, where I thought they should have played him versus where you thought they should have played him is different from, we can spend all the time that we want, but at the end of the day, all we can really hope for is that, 6 months from now or a year from now, people are not having these conversations about, Desmond Ridder not being the guy, similar to what we're seeing with Richie Grant. But time will tell on the issue. But I do think they do deserve they've earned at least some of the benefit of the doubt, but I'm sure many people will disagree with me on that. But what I will say is I do believe in Desmond Ridder. I think he has what it takes from the neck up, especially, to be a good quarterback. We're talking like a top 10, top 15 type of quarterback. And I think that's the sort of important traits that you're looking for, not necessarily the arm strength, not the athleticism, although Desmond Ridder possesses those things in enough abundance that it's not certainly a thing that is, I think, worth people spending a ton of time, being oohing and eyeing at other potential options for them. But it's really about that neck up ability that determines whether a quarterback grows from one year to the next year, as well as stability, right? And I was listening to, I think, the Ross Tucker podcast where he had Sean King on recently, and they were talking about Jalen Hurts and his development and his improvement. And I thought Sean King made a great point on that episode. I think it was Sean King that said this, but Jalen Hurts, for the first time in 2022, had the same offensive coordinator than he's ever had. At 3 years at Alabama, he had a different offensive coordinator a year, had a different one at Oklahoma, had a different one in Doug Peterson in year one in Philadelphia, and finally had, the same guy from 1 year to Shane Steichen and Nick Sirianni from 1 year to the next. And I think is a big part of why Jalen Hurts, in addition to the neck up ability that Jalen Hurts possesses in abundance, is a big reason why he was able to make the leaps that he was able to make. You look at another example of that with Josh Allen. Yeah, we marvel at the arm strength and the mobility and the athleticism and the size and all these various things, but it's really that neck up ability and the stability that Buffalo was able to have there with the same offensive coordinator for his first 4 years that I think really allowed Josh Allen to go from a, basically Drew Lock in his rookie year to, arguably the second best quarterback in the NFL today. And I hope that we can see something similar with Desmond Ridder, with the stability that Arthur Smith and his offense will provide, and having that similar neck up ability, that intangible competitive quality. Now, I would love to be able to come on this podcast, guys, and put on my prophet hat and tell you, oh, it's absolutely going to work out and the Falcons going to win X number of games and, this year, next year, and then win a title at this point in time. But I can't do that. But what I can sit here and tell you that I do think while their plan may not be perfect, I think it is a worthwhile plan. And, I'm sure there'll still be a lot of people criticizing that in the coming weeks, months, or whatever, but ultimately they'll just have to sort of prove it on the field. And so, I think we'll just look ahead, you know, we'll just keep looking ahead to the future rather than looking back at the past. Like I had a whole rant that I was going to go on about, people still being butthurt about past decisions, months ago or years ago when it came to the quarterback situation, rather than focusing on the present and the future. But I will leave that rant to today. I think we're looking ahead, promising to the future, because, it goes back to a conversation that we had in the past on this podcast last summer, where it's like the three keys that you're looking for developing a young quarterback, building a stable environment that can foster that sort of development that you see consistently throughout the league, where quarterbacks have success when they check as many of these boxes as possible. The first one is the running game, and I think the Falcons absolutely checked that box last year. You need that for your young quarterback to not be forced to have to carry the offense with his arm before he's ready and capable enough to do that. The second thing is you want a good offensive line that can protect him, right? And while we still have two question marks on the offensive line at left guard and right tackle moving forward, I think in general, most of us feel pretty good about the direction of that unit because of our confidence and our faith and our optimism in what Dwayne Ledford can do with that group moving forward. And then the third box is, you got to have a defense, right? So that you're not forced to have to go out there with a young quarterback and score 30 points a game in order to win games. And obviously the Falcons have a long way to go there, but they've been making strides that started this week with some of the signings, including one that happened Monday night in Kaden Ellis. And we're going to continue talking about Kaden Ellis as we continue today's episode. But again, I think there are reasons for people to be optimistic about the direction of this team. That's why I am sitting here going from a year ago being very critical about the direction of this team to being very optimistic about the direction of this team, because things have changed. And again, that goes back to the rant that I'm not going to go on today, which is I think people are still stuck in the past, still married to their opinions from a year ago or 6 months ago or whatever, and not willing to look at, what's going on here at Atlanta. And I think things are going in the right direction. Whether they're going at the pace that you want them to go, that's certainly up to the individual, but I think things are going in the right direction. And we'll continue that conversation talking about what Kaden Ellis can bring to the defensive side of the ball as we continue today's episode. But first, guys, I want to tell you that it is beyond the midpoint of the NBA season, and that means it's the perfect time to check out FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You can download their app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. And when you use it, make sure you check out their no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That means if your first bet doesn't win, you get bonus bets back, and you can do anything. Put that first bet on, money line, point spreads, parlays, whatever you want. And, of course, you can bet NBA, you can bet football, XFL's going on, you can bet NFL draft props, all that and more. So don't miss your chance to check out your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/locked on. That's FanDuel.com/locked on to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. So, guys, before we continue our conversation today on today's episode about Kaden Ellis, I do have a couple of homework assignments that I would appreciate you, especially those of you that are watching on YouTube. I'll link to the previous episode in the card above, or somewhere on the screen, where we did my free agent wish list, and I mentioned Kaden Ellis as my preferred signing at the linebacker position, and I kind of went through and broke that down. So that will be worthwhile to take a deeper look in sort of what Kaden Ellis is, that we won't necessarily rehash on today's episode, but I think that starts around like the 31-minute mark. So go check that out. And he also did a great interview. I think it's the Boot Crew Media YouTube channel, and I don't want to butcher the guy's name, so I won't say his name, but he did a great interview there. He was talking about how he worked with Ryan Nielsen. He was talking about sort of why he was able to take that step this past year, in part due to the stability, referring back, call back there, that he was able to get, because previously he had been basically, as a backup, been trying to master three positions, because in the event of an injury, you'd have to be inserted at one of three positions. But with the injury to Pete Warner last year, he was able to focus on one position and basically be the best will linebacker that he could possibly be. That's a 20-minute episode. I'll link to that in the description below. But I think those are worthwhile, 25, 30 minutes of your day to go check that out if you want to get deeper into Kaden Ellis. But the gist of Kaden Ellis, the Falcons signed him to a 3-year deal worth $21.5 million with $11 million guaranteed. I think in that previous episode, I projected him for like a 3-year, $20 million deal. So that's right in line with that. And my expectation is that Kaden Ellis is going to come in, be a will linebacker playing next to Troy Andersen, who's going to be that Mike linebacker. Troy Andersen is basically going to be our version of Demario Davis, but a kind of a combination of what Pete Warner also brought to the table. And Ellis is going to be that will linebacker that is kind of a combination of what Demario Davis did and Pete Warner as well. So it's a guy that's going to be a solid run defender, is decent in coverage, not going to be a guy that you're going to ask to go out there and blanket Alvin Kamara or anything like that, because primarily his role on third downs is going to be to rush the quarterback. That is what he does best. He played edge rusher at Idaho in college and has used that skill set to be a very productive pass rusher, especially over the final 8 games of last year, where he had 6 sacks across those 8 games, 7 sacks total. And I think moving forward, you can have a realistic expectation that, Kaden Ellis can, get 4 to 6 sacks every single year and really enhance this Falcons pass rush. We saw Demario Davis for years in New Orleans, average, I think, 4.5 sacks per year as one of the top pass rushing linebackers in the NFL. And, the fact that Kaden Ellis was able to basically push Demario Davis aside, tells you that the Saints thought that he was probably, even better in that regard. But with Demario Davis, that dynamic that he had was, Davis was more the pass rusher, and they always kind of paired him with a coverage linebacker. That was Pete Warner. That was Quan Alexander. And it wasn't because Davis is limited in coverage or anything. He's a very good coverage linebacker. But it was just kind of like, okay, this guy on third downs is going to rush the quarterback quite a bit, and this other guy is going to drop into coverage primarily. And I think you're going to see a similar dynamic with Ellis being the pass rusher and Andersen being the coverage guy. But we know Andersen also can bring that heat as a pass rusher. So I think it does work in that regard. And, when you look at what Kaden Ellis can bring to the table in terms of his upside for this Falcons defense, you just look at some of the Pro Football Focus grades he had last year. He was the 11th highest graded linebacker in the NFL in 2022, primarily because of how dominant he was in the second half. You look from week 10 on, when he was the starter filling in for Pete Warner and continued to get reps after Warner's, return to the lineup. That's how good he was during that month-long stretch. From week 10 on, his PFF grade as a linebacker, he was top 5 highest graded linebacker. He was the 3rd highest graded run defender during that stretch. He had the most sacks, the most pressures among linebackers during that stretch, and he was 7th in run stops. And so if you're getting a continuation of what Kaden Ellis was for those final 8 games, you're getting, an outstanding, potentially Pro Bowl caliber player. You're getting an outstanding run defender. You're getting an outstanding pass rusher. And even if he does come back down to earth a little bit and is only 75% of the player that he was during those final 8 games, he's still going to be a very good run defender and a very capable pass rusher in that regard. So I think you're getting a quality starter. And, I think when we talk about him uplifting this defense, he's going to help this defense. But I also think a big factor in terms of this defense going to a next level, and particularly this linebacker group going to the next level, is seeing Troy Andersen make a year 2 jump like we were talking about earlier with Richie Grant. And that's going to be probably something that we'll take a deeper look in later this offseason to sort of talk about the potential ceiling of where this defense could be if Andersen makes that jump. But I do think Kaden Ellis is going to, solidify that second spot and give you, basically a better version of Rashaan Evans, right? Rashaan Evans was a capable pass rusher, a capable run defender, in a limited coverage guy. And I think Kaden Ellis is going to be better in all 3 of those areas than Rashaan Evans. So that, I think it is an upgrade in that regard. But we'll probably talk a little bit more about Kaden Ellis as well as David Onyemata later this week, possibly even tomorrow's episode with Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints. But up next, we have Locked On Bucks. No, rather Locked On Commanders co-host David Harrison giving us the inside scoop on Taylor Heinicke, and we'll wrap up today's Locked On Falcons talking about that, guys. But first, I want to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by the Ultimate Football GM. This is a fun new mobile game, and if you want to put on your own GM hat and, do your best Terry Fontenot impression, you can do so with this hiring coaches, coordinators, trades, free agency, the draft, go through all the ups and downs of the season. It's a very challenging, it's a very realistic game. You can it's completely free. You can play it offline, play as you go, all that and more. I actually put down the game recently because I found it a little bit too challenging. I just couldn't get over the hump, being, getting bounced in the second round of the playoffs every single year. But I'll pick the game right back up and see if I can sort of get over the hump and build myself a championship caliber team. And you can do so yourself. And when you do, you'll get 100% free boost by using the promo code Locked On in all caps. That's LOCKEDON in all caps. So make sure you check it out today. And if you want to download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in your app stores. Again, that's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, everyone, we are back with another illustrious guest, none other than David Harrison. You have seen him many times here on Locked On Falcons over the years as one of the co-hosts of the Locked On Bucks podcast, but he is here in his second incarnation as the co-host of the Locked On Commanders podcast, here with us to talk about one of the newest Falcons in quarterback Taylor Heinicke. David, man, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I would be doing a little bit better if the news was that Taylor Heinicke had re-signed with the Washington Commanders than with the Atlanta Falcons. But I gotta tip my cap to the Falcons because David Onyemata was a guy that I really wanted to see get signed by the Buccaneers. They need some defensive line help. I wanted to see them sign him the last time he re-signed with the Saints anyway. So I've had my eye on him for a while. Jesse Bates was kind of my pipe dream to go to Washington. They released their free safety. I didn't really think it would happen, but I was like, if we're living in Madden world, maybe I can get Jesse Bates to the Commanders. And then Taylor Heinicke is one of my favorite Commanders this past season. And the Falcons just took them all. Maybe I'm a closet Falcons fan, actually.
We'll see about that when we get to September on that front. But Heinicke's an interesting player just because the quarterback situation in Washington has been very, let's say, cloudy the last couple of years, but he's been kind of the guy over the last two seasons that has emerged as their best option when it comes to going out there and playing winning football. Do you feel like what is it about Taylor Heinicke that has allowed him to emerge in that role?
Honestly, it's his authenticity. He is a true guy, like the guy that you see in the press conference, on the field, the emotion, the excitement, like that's Taylor Heinicke. Like there's nothing fake about what Taylor Heinicke brings to a football team, and that's really what makes him such a magnet to the other players in the locker room, and it makes them want to play better for him. Now, obviously, this is a situation where not many, if any, players on that roster already know Taylor. They've obviously probably seen him, heard of him, things like that. But as far as actually getting to know him, but what makes him such an easy draw to people is, again, once he gets into that locker room, once he gets to like OTAs and does all those things, and I can promise you, he's going to be there for the offseason workout programs. He's going to be there for all the voluntary stuff like that. Taylor Heinicke will be a guy that's present. Once they start to get to know him and they get in the meetings with him, they're going to find out that this dude doesn't have like a fake bone in his body. It doesn't appear. And that's what draws people to him. And then the fighting spirit. I mean, the man plays, Terry McLaurin described it as he plays every snap like it's the last snap he's ever going to play. It doesn't matter if you're up 30, down 30, first play of the game, last play of the game. The man goes out there with his hair on fire. And it really just I think it kind of rekindles like the childhood love of the game that sometimes professionals can forget because it becomes a profession eventually, and everything becomes a job. Taylor helps keep it fun and keep it fresh. And that's really the biggest thing that he brings to a team.
So it sounds like, from what you're describing, probably the main motivation that the Falcons had to bringing in Taylor Heinicke is to really push Desmond Ridder, that he's going to give him a real battle in training camp. Is that a fair statement?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. I think Taylor Heinicke can definitely give Desmond Ridder a run for his money. Physically speaking, like Taylor Heinicke's limitations are his limitations. They're not going anywhere. He doesn't have the biggest NFL arm. Sometimes his accuracy is a little bit suspect, especially over the middle. Like that's something to watch when you get to training camp, is if he's got to throw over the middle, really over the middle, over his offensive line. Like something that drove me crazy for the last 2 years of covering the Washington Commanders is how little they actually moved the pocket for Taylor Heinicke because he's a short guy. Like he's listed taller, but look, I'm 5'10". I don't know that Taylor Heinicke is much taller than 5'10". He's listed taller, but I don't know that he's much taller, okay? So he's looking over these massive offensive linemen. I know they're kind of squatted, but even squatted, they're taller than he is. And that's where you get some of the trajectory issues over the middle that you do. So the best thing for the Falcons to do is kind of move the pocket. You look at Desmond Ridder, and he's, I'm not going to tell you guys anything you don't know about Desmond Ridder. So I think that the two play styles kind of fit, even though they look like really different types of quarterbacks. And honestly, if they move Taylor Heinicke around enough and allow him to kind of be that on-the-move type of quarterback, I absolutely think that he's going to give Desmond Ridder a run for his money. The great thing here, Aaron, with Taylor Heinicke is if he doesn't win the starting job for whatever reason, he is going to be the best backup that Desmond Ridder could ever ask for. Like Taylor's going to help him study, help him prep, help him game plan, help him warm up, give him advice on the sideline. Hey, I saw this. What did you see? Like Taylor Heinicke is the ultimate team player, whether he's on the field or off of it. And for a young quarterback, if Desmond comes in and then beats him out for the starting job, that's a great thing to have because you don't have to worry about, is Taylor breathing down your neck? Like Taylor is not wishing ill on anybody. Now, the Heinicke Hive might wish ill on Desmond Ridder to get Taylor Heinicke on the field. Carson Wentz learned that very quickly in his time in Washington. So that's a little bit different. But look, Taylor, he loves a Heinicke Hive, but Taylor doesn't. I mean, he doesn't drive that ship. You know what I mean? He's just got his name on it.
I understand. Look, Falcon fans are very familiar with, let's call it, factions when it comes to different quarterbacks. So that will be nothing new. So the Heinicke Hive making its way down south to Atlanta, where Taylor Heinicke, kind of has a little bit of a home base because he comes from that area, just right up the road from Atlanta. So that could be a thing. But basically, David, it sounds like you're basically describing the perfect backup. You're describing a player that can legitimately come in here and make Desmond Ridder and push him and challenge him every single day. But in the realm of if Desmond Ridder is challenged and rises to that challenge, then he'll be the perfect guy to have in that film room. Is that a fair summary of what you're saying?
Yeah, 100%. And remember, this is a guy that when he thought his NFL playing days were over, he actually reached out to Scott Turner for a coaching job. So this is a guy who he has a passion for teaching, and he's a team player, wants to see everybody succeed, whether he's on the field or not. Was super pumped to watch Sam Howell go out there and lay one on the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, you talk about just a genuine person. You know what I mean? That's really what you're getting in Taylor Heinicke, and it's a great story, man. Like I'm sad for me because now I don't get to see Taylor Heinicke next year in the locker room and on the practice field and all that stuff. And he's one of the favorite commanders I have in that locker room. But I'm so happy for him because I mean and I did a bonus show about Taylor Heinicke leaving and some options for the Commanders moving forward. And I literally said from the couch to the Benz, like this dude was sleeping on a couch in Flowery Branch, Georgia 4 years ago when he got the call that his NFL career wasn't over. Next thing you know, he's in DC. He's got that playoff moment against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers where they lose, but that's the birth of the Heinicke Hive and then everything that he's kind of been through now. And now he's going back to Flowery Branch for training camp, and he's going to be playing in the Mercedes-Benz Dome, or is this Mercedes-Benz Superdome Stadium?
We don't say Superdome. No,
I was going to say I don't know what it's called, but the Benz, right? That's what I'm calling it. It's the Benz. Yeah. And not only that, but he's a Brett Favre fan. Like the Green Bay Packers were his favorite team growing up. Him and his father, who unfortunately has passed away they were Packers fans. They loved Brett Favre. That's why he wears number 4. Brett Favre's first team, the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, I don't know who wears number 4 for Atlanta, but I hope that Taylor gets to do it because Taylor getting to wear Brett Favre's number on a team that Brett Favre played for in the city that he once slept on. Again, like the whole sleep, it's probably overplayed, but like, bro, like the story is just amazing. And if Taylor Heinicke wasn't coming back to Washington, wasn't going to Green Bay, like Green Bay or Atlanta, like that's the only 2 spots I would want to see Taylor go to. So to see him going to Atlanta is great for him. Super happy for him. And he's a Lego aficionado. So if Falcons fans, if you're Lego people, follow him on Instagram, man. That dude does some sick stuff with Legos. So yeah, congrats.
Okay. All right. I appreciate that recommendation. Desmond Ridder is number 4 on the Falcons. So
is he? Well, you know what? Give it up, bro. Give it up.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So there's been lots of speculation that he might switch to his collegiate number of number 9. But that's Lorenzo Carter's number. It's a whole thing. So they will figure it out. David, I really appreciate you coming on, joining me, sharing your insights into Taylor Heinicke. and let the people know, what you got on deck for them for Locked On Commanders and Locked On Bucks.
Yeah, I mean, just going through this crazy offseason, the Commanders are trying to make some moves. Not quite as impressive as the Falcons are doing, but they're making some moves. The Bucks, I don't know. Eventually, they'll do something. Baker Mayfield, maybe. I don't know. Last place in the NFC South apparently is where they're headed. Looking at all the offseason moves,
Drake May,
you're
Caleb
going to go
Williams,
from
man.
Tom Brady being the best quarterback in the division to now you got Derek Carr, Desmond Ridder, and potentially Taylor Heinicke, and then the number 1 overall pick, which different discussion, but if I'm the Carolina Panthers, it's CJ Stroud, not Bryce Young. Regardless, obviously going to be reacting to all that kind of stuff. And then, just sitting back in awe of what the Atlanta Falcons are doing. Usually it's the Saints that are stealing my guys. Now it's the Falcons. So I can't get a break here.
Yeah, well, one day we'll see. We'll see what happens with the Bucks. They're going through their own little cap hell purgatory, whatever you want to call it. And maybe they come out a little bit rosier like the Falcons have done this offseason. So we'll see.
Hey, man. Hat tip. Exciting time. Rising up is definitely a word or a couple words that could be used. It's impressive. I'm happy for you.
All right, man. I appreciate it. So, guys, that's going to do it for us on today's episode. Thank you to David Harrison. Tomorrow we should learn that all these moves are official as of 4 p.m. Eastern time. And later in the week, potentially on tomorrow's as well, we'll have some guests break down some of these signings, give us the insights from, like I said, Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints. We'll potentially be joined by Locked On Bengals host, Locked On Patriots as well for Jonnu Smith, Locked On Bengals, obviously, for Jesse Bates. And we'll see who else the Falcons wind up signing. Obviously, the moves are not over. And we'll see, what else the Falcons add. The big money is in these first wave of free agency, which usually lasts about to Sunday, Monday, and then things tend to get a little bit quiet once guys realize, all the big money contracts have kind of dried up. Then you'll start getting the bargains, and that we know that's where Terry Fontenot and company, have done their best work. So still probably a lot more moves on the horizon for the Atlanta Falcons, and of course, we'll have you covered here on Locked On Falcons. And we thank you for your first listen, but check out your second listen, Locked On NFL Draft, where hosts Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez of the Draft Network are providing that in-depth coverage on the top prospects, deep dives into the sleepers and hidden gems that can change your favorite team's fortunes. So check out Locked On NFL Draft wherever you get your podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.